Where does the president find the 3%, the 3% economic growth that he needs? Where does he find better than average economic growth?
Well, he basically has to overheat the economy. That can be done if you have fiscal deficits which are large enough. If you can prevent the Fed from increasing interest rates, you can run your growth rate to more or less wherever you want. Whether it's wise or not is a different issue, but if he wants to do it and he has Congress behind him, he can do it.
Is the policy prescription within the rhetoric that you hear from the president and from the dreams of the administration to spend money, is it good old-fashioned Keynesian economics?
Well, I suspect that part of it is that. They also believe that, I think there is a strong feeling among the so-called supply-siders that if you decrease regulation, if you decrease the corporate tax, you get a big supply boost, which will allow you to increase demand without inflation. I think there are people who believe this as well. So it's probably a combination of both.
One of the hallmarks of Fred Bergston's work at the Peterson Institute has been to study people flows within America and particularly within immigration. Do we need immigrants or a greater rate of immigration to spur economic growth? How does that fold into your work?
Well, what I can say is that getting rid of 11 million immigrants people would be very costly for the US economy. That's a fairly obvious statement. Do we need more immigration? We probably can do without more immigration. It is not needed. That's not that we want immigration at this point. It's not like the 19th century in the US. But there are a lot of people who want to move to the US, can be productive, and can help. So I think the push for immigration is really coming from outside the US. But we can accommodate some. How much? We've seen there are limits to how much we can accommodate before you get a political backlash. We may be close to that.
You know, I look now at the debate of the weekend, which is certainly Peter Navarro, economic advisor to the president out of UCL Irvine. And then I look as well at Nora Robini and Project Syndicate with two different worldviews on American trade. One of them is very traditionalist, very simple, stark bilateral relationships, where Professor Robini takes the idea of a complexity, a process to how we do exports and how we do imports. Which is it in our modern trade? Is it more sophisticated, a process-driven supply chain trade, or can we use a simplistic, narrow bilateral interpretation that we see from Professor Navarro?
I think neither. I think the place to start is saving and investment, which is a country which saves less than it invests, is going to borrow from the rest of the world, is going to have a trade deficit. And that's the source of our trade deficit in the US. It is not due to the Chinese, it is not due to the Germans. That's the source of our problem. That's the one we have to solve. So I think thinking about the trade deficit as a whole, that's where you have to start. Then the notion of looking at trade deficits on a bilateral basis really doesn't make any sense, because even if we had completely balanced trade, we could well have, and we should have, trade deficits with some and trade surpluses with others. And if we start trying to reduce the trade deficit from one country, the goods will go through another country. It will be a game of musical chairs. So there are many misconceptions that have to be cleared here.
From your work at the IMF, I remember this seminar, the panel that you had with Joseph Stiglitz, among others, on the new economics. Help me here with the American interpretation of international trade. How do we get back to a multilateral dialogue, or is the WTO, as one example, is that dead?
Well, again, you're asking me political questions. I think the WTO, like all institutions, is not perfect, but it has done a good job. Maybe there are places where we've gone too far, places where we haven't, but it seems to me the WTO is still the place to do business. The notion of doing bilateral trade seems to me to be much less, bilateral trade negotiations seems much less attractive from an economic point of view.